Welcome, dear listener. Tonight we will travel to high in the thin air of the Andes, the rise of the Inca from a small highland valley, the roads and rituals that held their vast realm together, the civil war and conquest that tore it apart, and the quiet ways their legacy still lives on in our food, our festivals, and the words people speak in those valleys today. The Andes, where mountains cut the sky into sharp blue pieces and terraces cling to the slopes like ancient steps, an empire without iron, wheels, or writing rose to rule millions. If this cozy story helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. High in the thin, pale air of the Andes, where clouds drift almost to eye level and the wind tastes of stone and snow, it can be hard to imagine an empire. There are no highways, no glittering towers, and for most of history, no wheels rolling along the mountain paths. There is only rock, terraced slopes, the rustle of woven cloth, and the watchful faces of llamas, who seem permanently convinced that humans have made an odd life choice by living up here at all. Yet from this landscape, steep and unforgiving and beautiful, the Inca world will slowly take shape. Long before anyone calls themselves Inca, people are already learning how to live with these mountains, rather than against them. If you move through the Andes, even in your imagination, you notice something curious. Travel a long distance east or west, and the world changes slowly. Travel a short distance up or down, and it changes almost at once. In a few hours you can walk from icy highland grasslands down to mild valleys, and from there toward the dry coastal plains. This vertical world allows farmers to treat altitude like a stack of different gardens, each with its own crops. On the high slopes they tend hardy potatoes and quinoa, and keep herds of llamas and alpacas. In the lower valleys they grow maize and beans and fruits, guiding water through narrow canals. Far below on the coast, other communities fish in the cold Pacific currents and grow cotton in the bands of green that follow each river to the sea. Over centuries, this careful matching of crop to altitude, field to climate, becomes a kind of quiet genius of the Andes. By around 2000 to 3000 BCE, small communities in this region are already farming, weaving and gathering for ceremonies. Archaeologists find traces of early settlements, ancient canals cut into stony ground, the faint lines of old terraces, where people reshaped hillsides into stairs of earth and stone. These early villagers are not Inca, not yet, but they are inventing the techniques that later empires will depend on. Every terrace, every carefully managed field, is a kind of foundation stone for the future. Over time, certain places begin to shine more brightly in the archaeological record. One of them is a highland centre we now call Chavin de Huantar, active roughly between 900 and 200 BCE. Here, people built stone temples and plazas crossed by underground passages, where water could roar through hidden channels. Carved figures with fangs and talons and swirling hair decorate pillars and walls, blending human and animal features into mysterious sacred beings. Pilgrims likely came from far away to take part in rituals, carrying home new styles of art and belief. Chavin does not seem to be an empire controlling huge territories, but its religious influence spreads like ripples in a pond, and echoes of its imagery survive in later Andean art. Further along the coast and in the northern valleys, other powerful societies rise and fall. The Nazca people create vast designs on the desert floor, lines and figures so large that you really understand them only when you look from the hills above. The Mochi build adobe pyramids along the north coast, paint fine ceramics that show warriors, rulers and gods, and develop irrigation systems to feed their fields in an otherwise dry landscape. Each of these cultures experiments with political power, religious ceremony and agriculture in its own way. None of them is Inca, but the world the Inca inherit is not empty. It is full of roads, trade routes, sacred stories and long experience in managing difficult environments. By around 600 CE, two highland powers appear that look, in some respects, like early rehearsals for what the Inca will later do. To the north and centre of the highlands lies the Wari state, with a capital near modern Ayacucho. To the south, near the deep blue waters of Lake Titicaca, thrives Tiwanaku. Wari cities show signs of urban planning, straight streets, rectangular compounds, and administrative centres carefully placed to control surrounding regions. There is evidence of a road system linking distant settlements, and of officials overseeing production and storage. Tiwanaku, meanwhile, is known for its massive stone architecture and its ingenious raised fields, surrounded by canals that help protect crops from frost and improve soil moisture. Stone gateways and sculptures are aligned with the movements of the sun, binding time, landscape and ritual together. Scholars still debate exactly how these states worked, how centralised they were, and to what extent they resemble later empires. But what seems clear is that they managed to knit together different regions and peoples under shared religious and political umbrellas. Wari and Tiwanaku show that large-scale organisation is possible in the Andes, that roads and storehouses and planned settlements can support complex societies over long distances. When both states weaken and dissolve around the 10th century, their administrative centres fall quiet, but their example lingers on in memory and in stone. Later, when Inca rulers design their own systems of roads and provinces, they are not inventing the basic ideas from nothing. They are stepping into a conversation that has gone on for centuries. After Wari and Tiwanaku, the Andes enter a time that historians sometimes call the Late Intermediate Period. The old giants are gone, and in their place stands a mosaic of smaller kingdoms, chiefdoms and city-states. On the northern coast rises the Chimu Kingdom, with its capital at Chan Chan, a city of long, high adobe walls and maze-like courtyards. In the highlands to the south and east, groups like the Chanca, the Kola, and the Lupaka compete for land, water and prestige. Alliances shift, battles flare up and die down, marriages cement deals between ruling families. Power is regional and contested. No single state dominates the whole Andean spine. Somewhere in this patchwork world, in a high valley in what is now southern Peru, lies the Cusco Basin. Imagine entering the valley from one of the mountain passes. The air is cooler than on the coast, but warmer than the high Puna grasslands above. A river threads along the valley floor, its banks lined with fields. Houses cluster on the slopes, built of stone or adobe with thatched roofs, their walls catching the light at sunset. Shrines are everywhere. A spring whose water is said to have special power, an oddly shaped boulder, a hilltop cairn. These are huacas, sacred places where people leave offerings of coca leaves, food, or miniature figurines to honour the spirits believed to dwell there. In this valley, sometime around the 13th century in our calendar, a group later known as the Inca begins to gather influence. They organise themselves into kin-based units called Alus. An Alu is a community that is at once family, economic partnership and spiritual group. Members share land and labour. No one farms entirely alone. People help one another plant and harvest. They repair terraces together and clear irrigation canals before the rains come. Work obligations are balanced by shared feasts and rituals so that labour and celebration are woven tightly together. If you imagine modern neighbours who show up not just for barbecues but also every time you need to build a wall, dig a ditch or rethatch the roof, you have a faint sense of what this structure is like. Later Spanish writers record long lists of early Inca rulers, starting with Manco Capac and continuing through names like Sinchi Roca, Yoke Yupanqui, Meta Capac, and Viracocha Inca. For the Inca nobility, these figures are not just political ancestors but sacred ones, connected to particular places and myths. Modern historians, looking at archaeology and comparing different versions of the chronicles, see these early rulers as a blend of real leaders, mythic heroes, and carefully shaped memories. What seems most likely is that during this time, Cusco is the centre of a small regional kingdom rather than a sprawling empire. Its rulers control the valley and some neighbouring districts. They fight with nearby groups, make alliances, and gradually strengthen their hold over crucial farmland and trade routes. To understand how they see their special role, we can look at their origin stories. The Inca do not leave written texts of their own, but their nobles and priests preserve stories in oral tradition, passed from generation to generation. After the Spanish conquest, indigenous chroniclers and mestizo writers record several different versions. One common thread connects them all. The Inca are said to come from a sacred place and to be chosen in some way by powerful beings. In one popular version, the creator god Viracocha brings forth the sun, moon and stars from Lake Titicaca and shapes the first ancestors of different peoples. sending them out from caves and springs to populate the land. The ancestors of the Inca emerge from a place called Pacaretambo, the inn of origin, and wander until they reach the Cusco Valley. They test the ground by driving a golden staff into the soil. When it sinks easily, they know this is the place where they are meant to build their city. In another story, Manco Capac and his sister wife Mama Oclelo rise directly from Lake Titicaca at the command of the sun god Inti, sent to teach people how to live in an orderly, civilized way. The details differ, but the messages are similar. The Inca are linked to powerful deities, to specific sacred landscapes, and to the idea that they bring order and fertility to their surroundings. These stories are not modern history in a strict documentary sense, but they tell us what the Inca valued. They emphasize kinship, sacred geography, and the special destiny of Cusco. When later rulers claim to be children of the sun, they are drawing on these deep narrative roots. By the early 15th century, Cusco has grown into a more substantial town, with noble lineages occupying distinct neighbourhoods and temples marking important ritual points. The Temple of the Sun, later known as Coricancha, becomes a focus of worship. Fields outside the city are reserved as ritual lands for the sun and for the Inca rulers. Surrounding communities pay tribute in labour and goods, yet even now power is fragile. The Inca remain one kingdom among many, and ambitious neighbours watch them closely. Among those neighbours are the Shanka, a formidable highland group to the west. Tensions simmer for years, flaring into raids and skirmishes. At some point, probably in the late 1430s, this long rivalry turns into a direct crisis. According to the later chronicles, the Chanca decide to march on Cusco itself, assembling a large force and advancing into the valley. The Inca ruler at the time, known as Viracocha Inca, is said to lose heart. Believing Cusco cannot be defended, he withdraws from the city with some of the nobility, perhaps intending to ride out the storm elsewhere. At this moment, the sources introduce a younger prince, Kusiyupanqui. In the stories, he refuses to abandon the city. Instead, he gathers those willing to fight, calls on allied groups, and prepares the defences. As with many events in Inca history, the exact details are hard to pin down. Different chroniclers emphasise different episodes, and there is a layer of legend in the tale. But beneath the embellishments, most accounts agree on a few key points. Cusco faces a serious threat. A younger member of the royal family steps into a leadership role. The defenders, against the odds, defeat the invaders. The battle itself is described in dramatic terms in the chronicles, with sacred mummies carried into combat to inspire warriors, and enemies routed in confusion. For our purposes, the important thing is the outcome. The Chanca are beaten back, and Kusiyupanqui emerges not just as a successful commander, but as someone who can claim that he has literally saved the city and its people. In the political culture of Cusco, where victory and sacred favour are intertwined, this changes everything. After the crisis, Kusiyupanqui takes a new name, Pachacuti, often translated as he who overturns the world or world turner. The title signals that this is not just another ruler in a long line, but someone who will transform the very way the kingdom works. In the years that follow, Pachacuti is credited with reorganising the city's layout, reshaping state institutions, and beginning a series of conquests that extend Inca power far beyond the Cusco Valley. Later generations will point back to his reign as the true beginning of the Inca Empire, the moment when a regional kingdom begins to turn into Tawantinsuyu, the land of four quarters. For now, though, at the close of this first chapter, you can imagine the scene just after the victory. The sun is setting over Cusco, turning the valley gold. Smoke from cooking fires curls into the evening air. Llamas crop the grass along the slopes as if nothing unusual has happened. Yet within the city, everything is different. The threat has passed. A new ruler stands at the centre of power, and the mountains around the valley hold their usual calm silence, unaware that from this place, in the next few decades, an empire will stride out along their ridges and passes. When we left the story, the smoke of battle was still drifting over the Cusco Valley. The Chanca threat had been beaten back, and a younger prince had stepped into the light, taking the name Pachacuti, the world turner. The llamas, as always, pretended nothing unusual had happened, but in political terms this was a reset. Now we watch what happens when a small kingdom decides not just to survive, but to reshape everything around it. Under Pachacuti, Cusco begins to look less like a regional town and more like the heart of something much larger. He is remembered as a ruler who does not merely repair the damage from war, but redesigns the city itself, as if he sees Cusco as a living symbol of his new order. Later traditions say he lays it out in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal of strength, its head formed by the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, overlooking the valley. Whether or not the outline was as precise as the stories suggest, the idea captures the mood. This is a city being consciously crafted to express power. Temples are rebuilt, plazas widened, palaces for new royal lineages laid out around the central square. The city becomes both a spiritual centre and an administrative machine, a place where stone and ceremony work together. From this reworked capital, campaigns begin to push outward. First, Pachacuti secures the regions closest to Cusco, bringing nearby valleys and highland groups into his orbit. Conquest in the Inca world is not just a matter of marching in and shouting, "You belong to us now." It is followed by the negotiation, strategic marriages, and sometimes the resettlement of people. Local leaders who submit can keep a measure of authority as caracas, village or regional chiefs, but now they owe loyalty, labour and tribute to the Sapa Inca, the unique Inca in Cusco. Those who resist face more direct pressure. The Inca do use force, but they also use conversation, gifts and the quiet persuasion of well-timed road building. Pachacuti's son, often known as Topa Inca Yupanqui, carries this expansion further, pushing north and along the coast, incorporating the powerful Chima Kingdom and its great city of Chan Chan. Later, under Huayna Capac, Inca armies and administrators reach into what is now Ecuador and down into parts of Bolivia, Chile and Argentina. By the early 16th century, Tawantinsuyu, the land of four parts, stretches for thousands of kilometres along the Andes. It is not a perfectly uniform empire. Some regions are deeply integrated, others more loosely attached, but from the high plateau around Lake Titicaca to the cloud forests at the empire's eastern edge, people know that there is a supreme ruler in Cusco. To manage this, the Inca divide their realm into four great regions. The Suyus, radiating from Cusco like spokes from the hub of a wheel. Each has its own governors and layers of administrators, and below them, local caracas handle day-to-day matters. Information flows along this hierarchy, and so does obligation. At the top sits the Sapa Inca, considered a child of the sun surrounded by royal kin groups called panacas, each linked to a former ruler and his memory. It is a world where politics, family and ritual are tightly entangled. Like any big state, the Inca need to count things. Instead of writing with ink, they use quipus, bundles of cords with knots of different colours and positions. Specialists trained from youth can read these knotted records, keeping track of population, harvests and labour assignments. A quipu might look to an outsider like a decorative tassel, but in the right hands it holds the memory of who owes what and where food is stored. Some scholars even think that quipus might have carried more narrative information, perhaps recounting events and lineages, although this remains debated. For the empire's administrators, what matters is that the system works. They can call up the numbers needed to decide where to send workers or grain. Labour is the true tax of the empire. Inca society is built on the idea of reciprocity. You give, and in return you receive. At the state level, this takes the form of the mita, a rotational labour obligation. Communities send groups of people for set periods to work on state projects, building roads and terraces, serving in the army, tending flocks on the state pastures, or mining metal. In return, the state is expected to provide feasts, security, and, crucially, food from its storehouses in times of scarcity. This system can feel burdensome, especially when local needs clash with imperial demands, but it also allows for huge public works. When you stand on a stone terrace or walk along a restored Inca trail in your imagination, you are seeing the mita in action. The physical skeleton of the empire is its road network, the Kapaknan, the Great Road. Imagine narrow paths cut into sheer rock, hanging bridges swaying over deep gorges, stairways climbing out of valleys like ribbons of stone. These roads cross deserts, skirt cliffs, and traverse passes that leave travellers breathless from the altitude. Along them, relays of runners, chasqui, carry messages and small goods. One runner sprints from one-way station to the next, passes the message, and the next takes off. In this way, news can travel astonishingly quickly over long distances without a single wheel turning. Beside the roads stand tambos, roadside lodges, and great storage complexes filled with dried potatoes, maize, and textiles like strategic pantries for an entire civilization. All this infrastructure serves not just armies and officials, but also the quiet continuity of agriculture. Terraces unroll along the hillsides, catching soil and water that would otherwise sluice away. Canals thread between fields, guiding meltwater and rain. Farmers grow crops matched to each altitude zone, creating what some have called vertical archipelagos of resources. A family or community might have plots in the high Puna for herding, in the mid-mountain slopes for potatoes, and in the lower valleys for maize. Clever preservation techniques like chunyo, freeze-dried potatoes, and charqui, dried meat, allow food to be stored for years. In a region where frost, drought, and El Niño events can threaten harvests, this knowledge is life-saving. It is one of the Inca world's most important gifts to humanity, quietly carried forward into modern Andean villages. Beneath the grand schemes and long roads, daily life continues in the Islas. People plant, weed, harvest, care for children, and repair houses much as their ancestors did. But now they must also send members for state labour and tribute. Clothing marks status. Finely woven garments of soft alpaca or vicuña wool signal high rank, while simpler tunics and shawls clothe most people. Feasts and festivals punctuate the year, tying agricultural cycles to religious observances. Men and women often work in complementary roles, men ploughing with foot ploughs, women planting, both participating in rituals, each with responsibilities recognised by custom. There are hierarchies and inequalities, but also a sense that community, work and worship are meant to form a balanced whole. At the centre of this balance stands religion. The Inca world is filled with animate landscapes. Mountains, or apus, are powerful beings. Rivers and springs have their own spirits. Certain rocks and caves are huacas, points where the sacred is close. Over these local forces shines Inti, the sun, honoured especially in Cusco at the Temple of the Sun, whose walls once held panels of gold that shimmered like captured daylight. Pachamama, the earth, receives offerings before planting and during journeys. Ritual specialists oversee sacrifices of food, textiles and animals. Larger state ceremonies, some of them involving the offering of especially honoured children, are intended to keep the cosmos in order, to ensure rains and fertility. For us, it is enough to recognise that these acts, solemn and carefully timed, express an understanding of a world where humans, mountains and sky are all bound in fragile reciprocity. By the early 1500s, an observer standing on a ridge above Cusco would see an empire that appears confident and well stitched together. Roads vanish into the distance in each direction. Storehouses stand full. Envoys come and go. Quipucameocs, the keepers of knotted strings, move through corridors carrying the state's memory in their hands. Yet shadows are already lengthening beyond the horizon. New diseases, carried along unknown paths, may be creeping through the empire. A great ruler, Huayna Capac, will soon die, and with him the sense of settled succession. A quarrel between his heirs will tear at the fabric of Tawantinsuyu, just as strangers from across the sea arrive on the coast. For now, though, as the light fades over the terraced hills and the last runners of the day reach their stations, the system still holds. The stones of Cusco are warm from the sun, the plazas echo with music, and the llamas, untroubled by thoughts of politics or destiny, settle down for the night on terraces their ancestors helped build. By the time Huayna Capac rules from Cusco, the Inca world feels almost unshakable. Roads knot distant valleys to the capital, storehouses stand full of chunyo and maize, and messengers still run along stone steps with messages tucked in small pouches. From the highlands of what is now southern Colombia down towards central Chile, people know the name of the Sapa Inca. Yet, as often happens in history, the moment when everything looks most solid is exactly when invisible cracks begin to appear. Somewhere to the north, beyond the Empire's formal borders, strangers have already set foot on the continent. With them come animals the Andean people have never seen before, and diseases no one here has any immunity to. Illness travels ahead of the newcomers faster than any horse can gallop. In the early 1500s, long before most Inca subjects ever glimpse a European, sickness begins to spread through communities. Villages lose elders who carry memories, farmers who know which terraces to plant first, priests who remember the old prayers. The chronicles suggest that Huayna Capac himself dies not in glorious battle, but from one of these new diseases, probably smallpox, far from Cusco, up in the northern territories he has recently added to the empire. His death around the mid-1520s leaves a question that any empire dreads. Who comes next? Normally, the Inca ruling family would manage the succession within accepted patterns, choosing a son supported by powerful panicas and regional allies. This time, the process breaks down. Two sons, Huascar and Atahualpa, each backed by their own supporters, claim the right to rule. Huascar is based in Cusco, surrounded by the old nobility of the capital. Atahualpa commands strong loyalties in the northern regions, especially around Quito, where Huayna Capac had spent much of his later life. Neither man is prepared to step aside, and what follows is a civil war, the kind of slow-burning disaster no empire wants. Armies mobilise, Quipus are retied with new counts of warriors and supplies, and Iolus that once sent workers to build terraces or roads now send fighters to the front. Fields are trampled, granaries emptied, local rivalries stirred up as different groups back different princes. The great road network that once served unity now helps move troops to battle. For several years, the empire turns its considerable organisational skills inward, using them not to extend influence over new lands, but to tear itself in two. Atahualpa eventually emerges victorious. By about 1532, his forces have defeated Huascars, seized the royal family members aligned with Cusco, and marched southward, leaving a trail of fear and resentment in their wake. Atahualpa himself stays in the north, in the town of Cajamarca, savouring his victory and preparing to claim the throne in Cusco. Just as he reaches this pinnacle of power, a small band of strangers appears on the edge of his world. From the coast move Francisco Pizarro and a few hundred Spanish soldiers, with indigenous allies from earlier encounters further north. They arrive with steel swords and armour, firearms whose noise echoes against the rocks, and, perhaps most unnerving of all, horses, large, fast animals that can carry a person at a speed no llama could dream of. To Andean eyes, Wajir and our mount likely appear for a moment as a single creature, unlike anything in familiar myth. The Spaniards, for their part, look at the terraced fields and orderly villages and see a rich, organised society that might, with the right mix of boldness and calculation, be toppled. Through messengers and interpreters, Pizarro invites Atahualpa to a meeting in Cajamarca's main square. The Inca ruler agrees, arriving with a large retinue but not in full battle formation. After all, he has just crushed a powerful rival and commands a vast army nearby. He holds the upper hand, or so it seems. What happens next has been described in many chronicles, often with drama and confusion. There is a tense exchange, a clash of expectations, and then, at a signal, the Spaniards attack. Their horses and steel, combined with the element of surprise and the close confines of the square, create chaos among Atahualpa's unprepared attendants. When the dust settles, the Inca emperor has been taken prisoner. The capture of Atahualpa in 1532 is one of those moments when history feels like it pivots on a single point. The man who has just won a civil war now finds himself a captive in a foreign camp. His captors are vastly outnumbered in the wider landscape, but hold one priceless asset, the living symbol of imperial authority. Atahualpa, understanding both his danger and his captors' hunger for precious metals, offers a vast ransom. He promises to fill a room with gold objects up to a marked line, and twice over with silver, if only he is freed. For months, treasure flows in from across the empire. Golden cups and plates, ritual statues, jewellery and finely worked ornaments are carried to Cajamarca, stripped from temples and storerooms. These objects, many of them sacred offerings, are melted down and cast into bars, their intricate shapes lost forever to the fire. It is as if centuries of devotion are being quietly undone in the heat of the furnaces. When the promised space has been filled and divided among the Spaniards, Atahualpa expects release. Instead, he is put on trial, convicted on various charges, and executed in 1533. The details of the method and debates over his baptism belong to the chroniclers. For our purposes, it is enough to know that the ruler who once commanded armies now dies as a prisoner in a foreigner's camp, and with him goes much of the fragile hope that the old order might simply resume. In the power vacuum that follows, different factions scramble to present themselves as the rightful heirs to control. The Spaniards move toward Cusco, using both force and diplomacy, sometimes installing Inca nobles as figurehead rulers to give their actions a cloak of legitimacy. In November 1533 they enter the capital. Where once only the footsteps of messengers and nobles echoed on the stone streets, there are now iron shoes, church bells, and the murmur of a new language mixed with Quechua. Initially, some Inca elites attempt to cooperate. One such figure is Manco Inca Yupanqui, a young prince installed as a puppet ruler by the Spaniards. For a time, he plays the role expected of him, appearing in public rituals and lending his authority to the new order. But the behaviour of the conquerors, demands for labour, interference in traditional customs, disrespect toward royal mummies and sacred places, soon makes clear that this is not a partnership of equals. Manco Inca grows increasingly disillusioned. By 1536, he decides that cooperation has failed and turns to open resistance. What follows is a dramatic but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to reverse the tide. Manco Inca slips out of Cusco and raises an army. The Inca and their allies lay siege to the city surrounding the Spanish-held centre. From the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, warriors watch the streets below. Battles flare around the plaza, and for a time it seems possible that the newcomers might be shut in and starved out. But the siege drags on, the Spanish receive reinforcements, and indigenous groups opposed to the Inca, or hoping to benefit from alliance with the newcomers fight on their side. Slowly the siege is broken. The Spanish retain control of Cusco, though not without heavy losses, and Manco Inca retreats into the rugged eastern mountains. Beyond the high ridges, in the dense cloud forests of the Vilcabamba region, Manco Inca and his followers establish a new base. Here, among steep slopes and thick vegetation, they create what is often called the Neo-Inca state, a small but stubborn remnant of the old empire. From the 1530s into the 1570s, this hidden court maintains its independence, launches occasional raids, and serves as a focus for those who still see the Inca line as rightful rulers. Rulers like Sayri Tupac and Titucusi Yupanqui negotiate, resist, and try to maneuver in the shrinking space allowed them. It is a delicate existence, like tending a candle in a windy gorge. Finally, in 1572, Spanish colonial authorities decide to extinguish this last source of organised resistance. A campaign is mounted into the Vilcabamba region. Tupac Amaru, the last ruling Inca of this line, is captured and later executed in Cusco. With his death, the political structure of the Inca state is formally ended. There will be no more Sapa Incas ruling from hidden capitals or leading sieges against Cusco. The empire of stone and terraces has lost its rulers, but the story of its people is far from over. In the decades after these events, Spanish colonial institutions take firmer shape across the former Inca lands. Lands and labour are redistributed through systems like the encomienda, and later the repartimiento, which assign indigenous communities to Spanish overlords who claim tribute and work. The mita, once an Inca system of rotational labour with reciprocal obligations, is reshaped to feed the demands of silver mines in places like Potosi. Men from distant villages are sent for long stretches to work in shafts cut deep into the mountains, while their families at home try to keep fields and traditions alive. Church bells ring where once conch trumpets and drums marked rituals. Adobe and stone churches rise, sometimes built on or beside older temples, their walls incorporating blocks carved long before the first sermon is preached. Yet even as colonial authorities impose new systems, much of the older world persists beneath and around them. In many places, people continue to speak Quechua or Aymara in their homes and fields, using Spanish mainly when dealing with officials. Ainu communities endure, still organising work and land through shared obligations. Farmers continue to plant on terraces, to read the sky and the behaviour of animals for signs of weather, to preserve potatoes in Tuchunyo just as their ancestors did. On the way to Mass, someone may pause discreetly to leave a few coca leaves at a rock or spring they know is special, blending older devotions with new religious forms. The result is neither pure Inca religion nor purely imported Christianity, but a layered spiritual landscape where saints and mountain spirits sometimes look suspiciously alike. Not all resistance is quiet. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, there are local uprisings, protests against abuses, and legal battles in colonial courts. Indigenous leaders travel to Lima or even to Spain to argue for their communities, carrying petitions and genealogies that trace their authority back to Inca times. Some Andean authors, such as Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala and Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, set pen to paper and try to record the history and customs of their people, weaving together memories of the empire with sharp critiques of colonial injustices. Their writings become a bridge, carrying Inca stories and perspectives into a world where written words now weigh heavily. If you stand, in imagination, on a hillside above a highland town around 1700, the scene is both familiar and changed. Terraces still step down the slopes, women spin and weave by doorways, turning wool into bright cloth. Men lead llamas along narrow paths, but church towers now punctuate the skyline, and Spanish words drift from the plaza alongside Quechua. Children learn prayers from catechisms, but also hear at night stories of ancient rulers who could call thousands to arms with a gesture. The formal empire is gone, its last king executed and its capital transformed, but the deeper patterns of language, landscape and community remain, like the foundations of an old wall under a newer plaster. As dusk falls, bells ring for evening worship, and smoke rises from cooking fires flavoured with the same potatoes and maize the Inca once grew. The Andes hold their usual quiet, their snow caps turning pink, their valleys darkening. The age of the Sapa Inca is over, but the people shaped by that world are still here, finding ways to live, remember, and adapt. In the next part of the story, those memories will reach far beyond the mountains, carried in crops, festivals, and ideas that touch lives across the world. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, the formal Inca state is gone, but the Andes are still full of quiet continuity. Terraces cling to the slopes. People walk old paths that once fed the empire's road network. Children grow up hearing both church Latin and the soft rhythm of Quechua. The stone skeleton of the Inca world is still there, even if the muscles and crown have changed. History, like the mountains, is not in a hurry. Yet under the surface, memories stir. In villages and towns, people remember that their grandparents and great-grandparents belonged to an empire with its own rulers, its own logic of justice, its own rituals. Those memories do not stay entirely in the past. From time to time, they flare into action, like embers catching a bit of wind. In the 1780s, a major rebellion breaks out in the southern highlands of what is now Peru. A man who calls himself Tupac Amaru II claims descent from the last Inca rulers and takes up their name as a banner. His movement begins as a protest against abuses in the colonial system and quickly grows into a much larger revolt. Indigenous communities, some mestizos, and a few Creoles join in, hoping to reshape the order that has weighed heavily on them for centuries. For a brief moment, colonial authorities fear that the Andes might blaze up into something they cannot contain. The Spanish crown eventually suppresses the rebellion with harsh punishments, yet the name Tupac Amaru sinks deep into the collective memory. It becomes a symbol that later generations will call on again and again when they talk about resistance, dignity, and the long shadow of the Inca past. At the same time, ideas from Europe about rights, sovereignty, and the role of kings drift across the Atlantic and mix with local memories. As the 18th turns into the 19th century, revolutions and independence movements ripple through the Americas. In the Andes, leaders of the new republics argue over how to imagine their nations. For some Creole elites, the Inca are a convenient symbol of an ancient and noble past that can be folded into a modern, mostly European-facing identity. For others, they are ignored or treated as a distant, almost mythical background. Indigenous peoples themselves, of course, have a different angle. For them, the Inca era is not just a costume or an emblem, but part of their own family histories and landscapes. As the 1800s move on, foreign travellers begin to arrive in larger numbers. They come with sketchbooks, notebooks, and eventually cameras, following rumours of lost cities and strange ruins in the mountains. Cusco's old walls with their perfectly fitted stones catch their attention. Massive blocks at places like Sacsayhuaman impress them with their precision, stacked without mortar in curves and angles that shrug off earthquakes with calm indifference. The visitors write about what they see, sometimes romanticising, sometimes misunderstanding, but always adding to a growing fascination in Europe and North America with the mystery of the Inca. In the early 20th century, that fascination crystallises around one place in particular. In 1911, an American academic, Hiram Bingham, travels through the Andes with local guides and support. On a ridge above the Urubamba River, hidden by jungle growth and known to nearby farmers, he comes upon stone terraces and buildings that will soon be famous around the world as Machu Picchu. To local people, the site has never fully vanished, but Bingham's writings and photographs broadcast it to distant audiences. Over the decades, as archaeological work expands and tourism grows, Machu Picchu becomes a global icon, a stone city in the clouds, terraces cut into a mountainside like steps to the sky. As the 20th century progresses, archaeologists carefully document not just Machu Picchu, but also dozens of other sites, royal estates, ritual centres, small way stations along the old Inca roads. They trace the Capac Chan, the Great Road Network, over ridges and valleys, mapping sections that had been swallowed by time. In the late 1900s and early 2000s, parts of this network, along with Cusco and Machu Picchu, are recognised as World Heritage Sites. The world officially acknowledges what Andean communities have known all along, that the stones under their feet are part of a shared human story, not just local scenery. But stones are only part of the legacy. Perhaps the most far-reaching impact of the Inca and their Andean neighbours travels not along roads, but onto dinner plates. Before the arrival of Europeans, farmers from the highlands have already domesticated an astonishing variety of crops. Potatoes in many shapes and colours, quinoa, several forms of maize, and plants adapted to thin air and cold nights. When Spanish ships begin to carry plants and seeds across the oceans, these Andean foods go with them. In Europe, the potato slowly moves from curiosity to staple, reshaping agriculture and helping feed growing populations. Maize, already important in other parts of the Americas, spreads further. Quinoa, once a local grain of the highlands, will much later become fashionable on health-conscious menus far from its original fields. The techniques developed for managing Andean landscapes travel too, if more quietly. Terrace agriculture, long practiced by Inca farmers, becomes a model for sustainable farming in steep regions around the world. Engineers and architects study Inca stonework, intrigued by how walls built without mortar can flex and settle during earthquakes, and then stand upright again, while newer concrete structures sometimes crack. Hydrologists examine the old water channels and fountains, seeing in them a sophisticated understanding of pressure, flow and storage. The old empire, it turns out, still has practical lessons to offer, a planet worrying about erosion, climate change, and how to live with the difficult terrain. Meanwhile, in the Andes themselves, the descendants of Inca subjects and rulers continue their daily lives. In rural communities, people still organise much of their work and land through forms that strongly resemble ALIS. Households cooperate on planting and harvesting. They gather to repair irrigation systems and roads. They share flocks and fields. Two old concepts, Aini and Minka, still guide many of these activities. Aini is reciprocal help. Today I work on your field, tomorrow you work on mine. Minka is communal labour for shared projects, a path, a school, a festival space. Both rest on the idea that no one thrives alone, that you lean on your neighbours and they lean on you. If you squint a little, you can see the echoes of the imperial mitta, the old labour obligations, transformed and softened into local systems where the emphasis is on mutual aid rather than distant rulers. Language is another thread that has stretched from Inca times to the present. Quechua and Aymara, the major indigenous languages of the Central Andes, are still spoken by millions of people in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and neighbouring countries. In some regions, almost everyone in a village speaks Quechua at home and in the fields, switching to Spanish mainly in school or offices. In the 20th and 21st centuries, activists, teachers, and artists work to protect and promote these languages, pushing for bilingual education and official recognition. Songs, radio programs, poems, and even soap operas in Quechua help keep the language alive in new formats. Each time a child learns to count, joke, or argue in Quechua, a bit of the Inca world soundscape survives. Rituals and festivals with Inca roots also continue, though most have woven Catholic elements and local traditions into themselves over the centuries. In Cusco every June, crowds gather for a modern reenactment of Inti Raymi, the Festival of the Sun. Actors in richly decorated clothing representing the Sapa Inca, nobles and priestesses, process through the streets and perform set pieces in front of the ruins of Sacsayhuaman. Loudspeakers, cameras and tour groups give the event a very modern flavour, but beneath the staging lies an older impulse: to honour the sun, to mark the turning of the year, to feel a living connection to ancestors. Elsewhere, pilgrimages like Koilua Riti bring together tens of thousands of people who climb high into the mountains, blending Catholic devotion to a sacred image with offerings and dances that echo pre-Hispanic practices. At night, groups perform traditional dances on the icy slopes, accompanied by flutes and drums, while glaciers gleam faintly in the distance. Down in villages and towns, smaller rituals unfold on a more intimate scale. Before sharing a drink, someone may pour the first drops onto the ground, a small libation for Pachamama, the earth. Coca leaves are laid out reverently on a cloth, their positions read as signs. Travellers ask the Apus, the mountain spirits, for protection before crossing a pass. Children watch these gestures and learn, without anyone necessarily saying so, that the landscape around them is alive with relationships and obligations. Modern politics in the Andes is deeply marked by this heritage. Indigenous movements in countries like Bolivia and Peru use Inca and broader Andean symbols to argue for land rights, cultural recognition, and political power. The Huifala, a rainbow-coloured flag representing the indigenous peoples of the Andes, flies from government buildings, protest marches, and soccer stadiums. Debates over mining, deforestation, and water use often include questions about what it means to respect Pachamama and to uphold reciprocity with the land. In some places, constitutions and laws begin to incorporate the idea that nature itself has rights, echoing, in a new language, the old sense that earth and mountains are not just dead resources, but partners in a shared life. Tourism, too, shapes the contemporary Inca legacy in complex ways. Every year, visitors from all over the world arrive in Cusco, the Sacred Valley, and along the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. They bring money that supports hotels, guides, porters, artisans, and cooks. Many local families depend on this income, and in some cases, tourism funds cultural revivals and conservation efforts. But the constant flow of visitors also puts strain on fragile trails and sites. Communities near tourist attractions must negotiate how much of their daily life to open up to outsiders, what to sell, what to protect. There is always the risk that deep traditions could be reduced to simple performances, repeated for cameras and then set aside. The balance between sharing and safeguarding is as delicate as a hanging bridge over a gorge. Beyond the Andes, the Inca story continues to wander through books, films, and imagination. Some portray the empire as a kind of lost utopia, orderly, harmonious, a place where everyone had enough to eat. Others focus on its strict hierarchies and the burdens of labour and conquest. The truth, as usual, is more textured. A society capable of extraordinary feats of engineering and organisation, built by real people who loved, worried, worked and made mistakes. For those listening today, perhaps trying to drift off to sleep, the point is not to turn the Inca into either perfect heroes or villains, but to feel the richness of their world and how much of it still touches ours. Imagine, as this story comes to a close, a modern traveller walking a restored stretch of Inca Trail at dawn. The sky is just beginning to lighten, the air cool and thin. Stone steps, worn by centuries of feet, lead upward between old terrace walls. In the distance, a village wakes. Dogs bark. A rooster complains about the concept of mourning. A woman steps out to toss a few drops of chicha to the ground for Pachamama. Somewhere a child is learning their first words in Quechua. Somewhere else, a scientist studies Inca canals for clues about sustainable water use. A farmer plants potatoes on terraces that have held soil in place for 500 years. A cook in another continent stirs a quinoa soup without realizing the crop's long journey. The empire of the Inca, with its Sapa Inca, its palaces and its formal ceremonies, lasted only a short span in the wide arc of history. But its deeper gifts, ways of farming steep land, ways of weaving community through reciprocity, ways of treating mountains and earth as partners, have flowed outward far beyond its original borders. Even now, as night settles over the Andes and the last light catches on old stones, those gifts hum quietly in the background of millions of ordinary lives, as steady as the mountains and as familiar as a bowl of potatoes on the table. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time.